Welcome to our show. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Doug Kechijian. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Resilient Performance Physical Therapy in New York City, and I was also a pararescueman in the U.S. Air Force. So I did that for about 13 years, and formally separated this past December to focus on running the sports medicine practice here in New York.
I see. I have a question for you. When you were in military, how did you make the transition from military service to a business world? Because I researched your company and it's very impressive. So, what was the transition? How did it start?
Yeah, it was a pretty gradual transition, and it wasn't one. I didn't necessarily know that I was going to be a business owner. So, long story short, I joined the Air Force through an Air National Guard unit. So, what people think of as the National Guard, but what most people don't know about the National Guard is that you can actually do it full time. So, most people associate the Guard and Reserves with, like the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year thing. So I actually joined the Air National Guard to be a pararescueman, and I initially signed up for 6 years. And for pretty much all those 6 years, I was actually full time. So it was effectively kind of like being in an active duty unit, but I just signed up with a Guard unit. So there's a little bit of a bureaucratic distinction, but effectively I was full time military. After my initial 6 year enlistment, I switched over to part time, where I was doing way more than the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, because the job that I was in requires a lot of training to stay proficient. So I was still doing a couple of months a year, but it allowed me to go to graduate school to pursue my doctorate in physical therapy. So because I was in graduate school and I was part-time in the military, I essentially had two careers at that point, because even though the military was, uh, in a literal sense, a part-time commitment, it still was, it still required a great deal of training and time to remain proficient. So when I made the decision ultimately to run my own practice and to be a business owner, it wasn't because I really had any interest in being a business owner. And actually, the business aspect is the part that I kind of enjoyed the least. Like, I basically got into medicine to be a clinician, but when I basically started with, like, okay, what's going to be the best way for me to practice medicine where I can do it on my own terms? And the way for me to do that was to run my own practice, because healthcare is kind of a very dynamic field, and it's ever changing. But in my particular business model, I don't take insurance directly. I'm completely out of network. And the reason why I do that, there's a lot of reasons, but the biggest one is because I didn't want an insurance company to dictate how I treated somebody. So I see all of my patients or clients one-on-one for an hour. And there's kind of like, in my field, there's basically two ways to make a good living. One is to be out of network and place a higher premium on quality and one-on-one service, where you're not taking insurance and you're charging a decent amount of money out of pocket, but you're not seeing people as frequently. Or you can run more of a volume-based model, and where you take insurance, and because the insurance companies, the reimbursements are becoming lower and lower, it's really hard to treat one or two people an hour in an insurance-based model. So you have to see more people per hour to kind of make the same sort of salary. And like I said, I wanted clinical effectiveness and utility to be what drove the business model, not necessarily bottom line. But I just didn't want to be in a volume-based model where I was going to be treating, 4 to 6 people an hour, because for most non-traumatic injuries, like if you get, hit by a car and you need to have a surgery, then you might have to go to physical therapy 3 times a week to get back to full function. But for most people who just have kind of like these general aches and pains, I think that the traditional model of coming in 3 days a week for 8 weeks is a little bit antiquated. And I don't know how effective it is, number one. And it's also very time consuming. Like, as a healthcare consumer, if I went to the dentist and the dentist said, yeah, you've got this issue with your teeth, I want you to come in 3 days for a week for 8 weeks, I would tell that person that he or she was out of his mind. I would just say, I'll go home and I'll floss on my own. I'll brush my teeth. And if I need a major kind of procedure, I'll
Yeah.
come in and see you. And so physical therapy and sports medicine can be the same way. If someone is compliant and willing to modify some behaviors, maybe devote 10 to 15 minutes a day on self-care and maintenance. And most people are exercising anyway. So It's just a matter of maybe exercising a little bit more intelligently. So not even necessarily demanding that much more time out of somebody's day, but with some very minor lifestyle and behavioral modifications, I think people can do really well tending to their own sort of issues on their own. And it saves time and ultimately it saves money, because even though I might see somebody one time an hour and the cost to see me is more than what a copay would be, I typically see most people one or two times before I discharge them, versus the traditional model where, you know, it's like 3 days a week for anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks. So if a copay is $40 a session, you know, after like a couple of visits, it ends up being a wash anyway. But I like to believe that I'm saving people time. So long story short, I didn't set out to be a business owner, but because I wanted to do things on my own terms, I kind of had to be a business owner to practice medicine in the way that I want to. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Well, let me. I actually now I have two questions for you. We'll start with the first question. And this will be the transition from military to civilian life.
Sure.
What advice would you give someone who is leaving military and let's say they're preparing to be that, you know, I'm sure you know other, you know, soldiers that, you know, left military, and what would be your advice as you prepare for the transition? What would be some steps people need to take?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is just kind of embrace the challenge. I mean, people in the military tend to like challenges, and the military kind of teaches people to be very systematic in what they do. So even though you're solving different problems, the way that you can solve problems in the business world is very similar to how you would solve problems in the military. And I know that people, when they make these transitions, and this was myself included, I read some business books and I asked people for advice, and everybody wants kind of like the magic algorithm to run a business.
Yeah.
But when you read, and as you know, when you read these books and you talk to business owners, no one's ever going to tell you anything that's like so profound that you're going to be totally blown away by it. A lot of it's very intuitive and it makes sense, but it's the execution part that's hard. So conceptually, like running a business is pretty easy. It's actually it's executing and running the day-to-day things in practice that make it difficult. And so I would say that definitely like do your research and try to find the commonalities that most business owners say makes people successful. But at the same time, there's a huge amount of trial and error involved. And even when you're trying to find like your niche population and clientele and marketing yourself, like there's no surefire way to do that. There's just like, I had to make a lot of mistakes, and you're going to make mistakes, but ultimately, just like in the military, you find this, you kind of develop a system, and then as long as your system is kind of sound from a procedural and a conceptual standpoint, the principles don't really change. It's just how are you fine-tuning those principles on an execution level to be successful. So be systematic in what you do. Have a system that allows you to be somewhat to be simultaneously flexible, but also have what we use in the military, what we call standard operating procedures. So you want to have something that's systematic, but at the same time that's not so robotic, but allows you to be flexible. And just don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you will make mistakes. I mean, I was lucky that my model is kind of set up where I don't have a whole lot of overhead. So I, like in the beginning, I was leasing all of my space by the hour. So instead of like having to commit to a very expensive monthly lease agreement, I would only pay a percentage of what I made per hour to the facility. So that allowed me to not have to incur too many expenses initially and take out too many loans. So that's a huge thing. It's kind of like, you know, try to maximize reward and minimize risk to the extent possible. And then another key thing is, and this is also kind of obvious, but it gets forgotten when you're running a business, people are always trying to create a neater package when it comes to marketing, but you still, I think, should have a good product. Now, marketing can make up for a crappy product, but ultimately we all kind of want to, it's kind of like in the military, you always want to sort of believe in the mission. And the more you believe in the mission, the more passionate and devoted you're going to be to executing that mission. So if you have a product you believe in, it makes it much more easier to do the day-to-day work versus having something that you don't believe in that much, and now you're trying to market it and use marketing as a way to compensate for something that isn't very robust. So like in my particular field, I could read all the business books in the world, but ultimately, even if I get people in the door, I have to keep them coming in. And the way to do that is for me to be a good practitioner. So whether you're a practitioner and you're providing a service like I am, or you're trying to sell a particular product, the product has to be good. So in my case, that product is service. And if you're selling something, then whatever you're selling has to have some kind of an appeal. And that requires subject matter expertise in whatever you're doing, whether it's that particular product or in the service. So even though I'm a business owner, I'm still very much a practitioner, and I'm constantly trying to evolve my skill set. And because I'm in a medical scientific field, the knowledge is increasing at an exponential rate, and I've got to stay on top of that to remain relevant. So I mean, it's simultaneously very challenging, but also very exciting and rewarding, because I kind of have to do two things. I have to remain a competent practitioner, but also make sure that I'm getting people in the door, and that I'm running a business effectively. It's kind of like having two sort of jobs in one. But if you do one at the expense of the other, and you become very imbalanced in what you do, then I don't think you're going to be successful in either endeavor. So it's kind of the idea that you want to have some specialized knowledge, whether you're running a business or developing a particular product. But if you become so specialized and myopic, where you're only focusing on the business side of things, or you're only focusing on the product or the service side of things, then you can't do one well without the other. So you have to have a global mindset, but also kind of get into the details as much as you need to kind of make both of those aspects of the business sort of harmonious.
So, let me ask you a question. Uh, from the point where let's just call it, you got the idea to start the business, and if you could take us through the timeline from the point of the inception of the idea to the point where you start serving your first client, how long did it take you to start the business?
Well, so I had to start the business, number one, out of necessity, like I talked about, because of the model that I wanted to provide. But also I practice physical therapy and sports medicine out of a traditional fitness facility.
Okay.
And so because a fitness facility can't charge or advertise that they do a medical service, I legally had to set up my own LLC within the facility that I worked at. So in other words, like, even though I lease space out of what's essentially a gym, the gym can't receive payment from somebody that's having a medical service provided, because that's just against the law. That's the way the laws are written.
Okay.
So even like before I wanted to do anything and set up my shingle, I had to set up an LLC because I was providing a medical service out of sort of a non-medical facility. There are rules and regulations that stipulate what you can and can't do in that type of a scenario. So as soon as I knew that I wanted to work for myself and then practice medicine out of a fitness facility, I had to set up my own LLC. So that, between like the paperwork and filing for it, takes like a couple of weeks if it goes well. And then once that was established, then it was pretty quick. I mean, having the LLC and then actually getting people in the door are two different things. So once I had the LLC, I had to, some of the business kind of evolved organically because I was working in a fitness facility. I was able to network with some of the trainers there and just meet some of the members. And so some of my initial caseload just came from the people that I was interacting with and meeting on a day-to-day basis. But then after that, it really spread more through word of mouth. So that's why having a product that you believe in is really important, because most people have, especially who are very active and fit, have had physical therapy before, and they have a particular sort of viewpoint of what it is. And that's the traditional model where you're going 3 days a week for multiple weeks. And because my model was a little bit more, put more of the onus on the client or the patient, I saw people a lot less. But people who are very, very active and take ownership over their health kind of prefer that model, because it allows them to the extent possible, sort of fix themselves without having to rely on me. And the reality is, like, most people, if you give them enough time and you tell them not to do the thing that hurts, are going to feel better anyway. It's kind of like in stats, the regression to the mean. But if you're doing the right thing and you allow people to take ownership, they can get results a lot faster. And my goal, even though it kind of sounds counterintuitive from a business standpoint, is to make myself obsolete. I know that that'll never happen because people are always going to kind of need somebody with a higher level of expertise when it comes to fitness and training. But to the extent that I can have the person take ownership over themselves, I think they appreciate that honesty. And I tell them, I'm like, I'm not trying to make you dependent on me. I don't want you to see me 3 days a week. If anything, you come in once, do the stuff on your own, and then we'll follow up in 2 weeks and do that 2 to 4 times, and hopefully I don't see you again. I think people appreciate that, and when they know they're dealing with somebody who's not trying to kind of sell something all the time, then they tell their friends, and that's how the practice grew. I mean, I did like all the marketing stuff you're supposed to do. I tried some of the search engine optimization type things, and I got some patients out of that and some referrals, and I do quite a bit of social media, and I've written for some major publications.
Yeah,
But
your social media and marketing effort is actually very impressive.
I appreciate that, but I really I
Research,
get very little, very few referrals from that. It's really word of mouth. So
I see.
again, it's one of those things where I did everything I was supposed to do, but I think what ultimately, and I'm not even saying that I'm like successful or where I want or need to be at, but how I've gotten to the level that I'm at, whatever that level is mainly through word of mouth, just because people appreciate the service and they tell their friends. So it's one of those things where people always try. We live in a world now that's very data driven and analytics driven, and I appreciate that, and I think that we need to have objective metrics to quantify what we do. But you can't take the human element out of business, and particularly when you're providing a service. If people believe in that service, they'll tell their friends, and when they trust you as a practitioner, that also makes them want to tell people. So that word of mouth and that human element is huge, and particularly in a service-based industry. Now, if you're in the tech world or trying to sell a product, it might be a little bit different. But in the service world, especially when there's a huge human element and a personal compatibility element to what I do, I can't underestimate that aspect enough.
So we're gonna put a link. What is the usual? Well, let's see. If someone wants to become your client, what is the usual flow? How do they reach out to you?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And when I sort of try to implement that process and set it up from scratch, I was like, all right, like I go to medical people too. We all do. And I was like, at any point, where can I lose somebody? So I always hated having to call like a physician's office, get put on hold for 20 minutes to make an appointment. Especially now we have computers and apps, like there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to set up everything online. I also didn't like going to a medical provider's office, and then when you get there, you show up on time and they'll say, okay, now you've got to fill out like 20 minutes worth of paperwork. And so now you're already kind of like late for your appointment, even though you showed up on time. So I was like, how can I streamline that entire process? So all of my scheduling is online. So my website is www.resilient, the word resilientpt.nyc. You go on there, it tells you what we do, what services we provide. It's got frequently asked questions. And that also saves me time, because people, when I didn't have all that information, would always email me like, hey, do you treat this? Or
They
do
would
you take
ask
insurance? Do you do all these things? And so I number one, want to save the client time and the consumer time, but also want to save myself time by not answering questions that I can answer on the website. So most of the information, not all, I mean, every situation is somewhat unique. And if people have a unique question, they can feel free to email us on the website. But most of the information is there. There's a scheduling tab that it has an online calendar. It shows all of my availability. So like if it's not available in the calendar, it's because I'm not available then. And then once you click on the time that you want, then you'll fill out all of your health history forms. So instead of doing it when you're at the office and wasting time there, because I only have an hour with people, so I want it to be spent entirely. I want to devote that entire hour to treating people and getting to the root of the problem, not to doing things that they could do at home, like filling out paperwork. And because it's all automated, I made the entire health history form, for the most part, just yes or no answers. So like in New York City, if you're waiting on the subway, you can go to the website or use the app, type in your yes or no questions. There might be a couple of things that are more qualitative that you could fill out if you want to provide more information, but we've done kind of the pilot runs, and at best it takes 2 minutes to schedule. At worst, it takes 5 minutes if you fill out more information. But once you do that, you're done. Like, you enter your credit card information there, and then the online scheduling software like charges a cent to make sure that it's not a fraudulent credit card. So the credit card's on file, and then once the service is rendered, we can run the credit card. So there's no moment at which you have to go to someone and then run the credit card afterwards. So it pretty much takes care of everything. And so again, like, I was like, where can I lose somebody? If I were the customer, what would I think was a pain in the neck? And I tried to eliminate all those obstacles. And we've gotten very good feedback where people say, yeah, like, that was really easy. I wish all of my medical experiences were like that. So that's what we're going for, is just trying to make it as convenient as possible, because the technology is there. So why not use it?
So I'm gonna post all the links. So also some of the links to the other interviews you've done. Let me ask you a last question. Where do you see yourself? Do you see yourself? What's the growth plan for your company? What would you want to happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It's something that my partners and I are trying to strategize about right now. I would say that definitely I enjoy the clinical aspect and the patient care side of things, but from a business standpoint, that's only so scalable because, like I said, our model is based on quality, not on volume. So it's not like I can open up a whole bunch of clinics and try to reproduce what we're doing now just because the service is so quality based. So our growth potential is we only have so much potential from that side of things. So we want to, at some point, kind of systematize what we do, where we can create different educational platforms, whether it's in person through seminars or online, because we've gotten a lot of good feedback even from other sports medicine providers where they're interested in our model. And even though I do it and I practice it every day, until you put it to paper and you write it down, it's not scalable. So we're trying to make that more scalable, where we're going to offer different online educational platforms and even some in-person seminar type things, kind of like what a fellowship would be in medicine. And then we also do quite a bit of consulting with some different collegiate and professional sports clubs and military units. So I enjoy the consulting side of things because you can go in and audit different staffs, help them to systematize what they do, set up different standard operating procedures, and even help them with different hiring and personnel decisions. But again, kind of teaching people just how to optimize what they do versus going in there. And because some consulting positions in my field, people will go in, they'll treat an athlete for a day and then leave. And that's kind of like, it's more of a magic show than it is a valuable service. So what we really want to do is help to systematize what we do and then teach it to other people so that they can actually use it and not necessarily copy what we do verbatim, but implement that into whatever it is that they're doing and kind of come up with their own system. But so we're really getting more into the education and the consulting side of things, because from a business standpoint, it's much more scalable than just providing the quality one-on-one care on an hourly basis, which is kind of the majority of what we're doing right now.
I see. So, maybe, if possible, because I would like to have a separate, interview with you where we can talk about some of health advice you can provide to, to professionals.
Sure.
Because most of us are just sitting all day long in front of a computer. So not a very healthy lifestyle. So, but, I would like to thank you, for the interview. And is there anything you want to tell us before we, wrap it up?
No, I mean, thank you everybody for listening, and thank you, Jean, for the opportunity to talk.
And I hope we can bring you back because I have a list of questions about physical, fitness for professionals. Thank you very
Sure.
much. Thank you,
All
Doug.
right. Look forward to talking to you soon. Bye.
Thank you very much.